Yes, so my name's India. I work for Oriel College at the University of Oxford. I am also an Oxford alum. That said, I am very well qualified to talk about panic, but I did go through this system actually from a very similar background to any of the young people who are attending this evening. So I grew up in Swindon in Wiltshire for all my sins. I went to my local comprehensive school and then went on to a sixth form college, not that different at all to King Ed's, for my A levels. I was also a first generation university student. Nobody in my family had been to uni before me. And actually, the reason that I do this job now, so I'm the outreach officer at Oriel, is the fact that I never felt anything but at home at Oxford. And I think that there are a lot of other young people, probably much more talented than I ever was, who will be in a very kind of similar situation, finding their way through their applications, and who basically could benefit from the same sort of advice and encouragement as I did. So let's get started. I've got quite a few bits and pieces to get through this evening, but that's just because this is quite a big topic. So first of all, I'm going to put I think 4 questions up on the screen. Yep, I won't say 5. That's inaccurate. So these are the kinds of questions that I think that anybody who is considering a university, including but not limited to Oxbridge, should be considering and should be asking of themselves before they actually, decide to put it on their UCAS form. So firstly, do we offer a course that you would enjoy? This is basically going to be the most important decision that you make as part of a university application. Are you on track to achieve the right grades for that course? This is, almost a little bit of housekeeping, but it is of course going to be important that you or your child is going to be aiming for a course which is going to be achievable for them. Do you think that you would enjoy living in a college environment? And these particular 2 questions are very much to do with the specifics of living and studying at Oxford and Cambridge. So do you think you'd enjoy living in a college environment? I'm going to talk a little bit about that this evening. And also, do you think that you'd enjoy being taught in the way that we teach at Oxford? Because that is also slightly different in some ways to how it works at other unis. If you can answer yes to all of these things in the kind of period of time just before you are applying to university, there is no reason that you or your child should be counting yourself out of applying to Oxford or Cambridge. This is the basic kind of stuff that I say, yep, if all of these things apply, then why on earth wouldn't you give it a go? It's going to be one position on your UCAS form, and you're never going to know unless you give it a go. I'm also going to talk you through a few different parts of the application process this evening. Teams has just frozen on me. It's one of those evenings, everybody. Oh, just bear with me. I just need to restart my presentation. Okay. There we go. So Oxbridge, I'm sure that you will already be aware of Oxbridge to some extent, but it's also important not to assume. So you've got Oxford at the top there, Cambridge at the bottom, and if you smush their names together, you get Oxbridge. These are 2 of the world's oldest and most respected universities. If you are the kind of person who likes to follow the university league tables, Oxford and Cambridge will typically be in the 1 and 2 spots, if not the top 5, both in the UK and also worldwide. They have fantastic global reputations, and that very much comes with a long history of fantastic high-level, high-quality university courses. We have 2 major differences between Oxbridge and other universities. First of all, our collegiate structure. So for that reason, I'm talking to you as a representative of a college of the University of Oxford this evening, and also our focus on small group teaching. Also, just a heads up, an important caveat, I think, is that you can apply to one of these universities, but not both at the same time. So you can't actually put both of them on the same UCAS form. So I always joke to people that, you can do all of the research that you like, you can really interact with the activities at both universities, but when it comes to that UCAS form at the beginning of year 13, you do have to pick a side. Now, let's first of all talk a little bit about colleges. So just to kind of put it briefly, your college is your home base as a student at Oxford or Cambridge for, your your course basically, and then also to some extent becomes the place that you maintain a connection to. It will be the place that students come back to visit, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, maybe not quite 100 years, after they have graduated from university. We've got 30 at Oxford and 29 at Cambridge, which are available to undergraduates. I've chosen pictures of 6 because I tried when I was very new to this job. I did try to put all 30 at Oxford on a PowerPoint slide, and it was a disaster and nobody could see anything. So here you go. Here's 6, which I've just used ones that look different to illustrate the fact that they all look different to one another. This will be where students will sleep, well, they will have opportunities to socialize, they will have their small group teaching, they will have places that they can either get food or cook food, and a whole host of other sorts of administrational things. The college that I work for is Oriel College in the top left hand corner. We have as yet, thanks to good old COVID, we were planning a fantastic King Ed's trip to Oriel in the summer of 2020. For obvious reasons, that has not happened yet, but we are very, very hopeful for next summer. Oriel is an older college, so we're the 6th oldest college in the university. We were founded in 1326, and we're also at the small to medium end of the spectrum in terms of size. So we have about 95 students in a year group. I feel certainly for anybody coming from King Ed's, I felt the exact same way coming from my sixth form college. I was like, oh, I don't want to go to a college that's too big. And then I realized that my idea of big was completely kind of in a different scale, a different realm to how big the colleges at Oxford and Cambridge are. So our students are a member of 3 different things at Oxbridge. Their college, which is their home base, kind of deals with pastoral stuff, deals with eating, sleeping, socialising, and also the small group teaching. But they're also a member of the university itself. Obviously, that will be the awarding institution for their degree qualification, and also the faculty or department for the subject or course that they are studying. Now, regardless of where you do go to university, you're going to be a member of 2 of those things, the university and the faculty of or department anyway. It's just that you've got this additional layer at Oxford and Cambridge, which kind of takes the place of a university halls of residence, but to a slightly greater extent. I'm just going to skip through that because we've already talked about that stuff. Okay, so college choice. You can make a choice, you can make a first choice preference for a college that you particularly like the look of on your UCAS form. This, I will tell you now, is actually the least important part of the whole application process. However, it's also the part of the application process that people stress the most about. So I'm here to kind of break this down a little bit for all of you so that you've got a bit more of an understanding as to how to go about choosing a college. Or indeed the benefits of not necessarily picking a college. So if you are particularly keen to choose a college to apply to directly, make sure first of all that you're checking which colleges offer your course. There is no real difference between provision in terms of the actual teaching and the course content across different colleges. It's just that some colleges aren't going to offer every single subject. For instance, at Oriel, we don't happen to offer biology or geography. The places for those courses are spread out across other colleges of the university. If you are looking at a course, for instance, like English or law, which are very big courses at Oxford and have, lots and lots of student spaces each year, there won't be a college out there that doesn't offer those courses. You've got all 30 to pick from. If you're looking at something which is slightly smaller, has a slightly smaller cohort, for instance, the course that I did at Oxford was Classics in English, a joint honours course, which had quite a small cohort indeed. It may well be that those places are spread out across a smaller number. Now, there's a fantastic informative webpage on the university website and also in our digital prospectus. The same will apply to Cambridge, where you can go and you can check out which colleges are offering which course, just so that you aren't kind of fruitlessly researching a college that you can't actually apply to because it doesn't offer your perfect course. Now, college facilities are going to be fairly similar across the board. They will all be able to give you accommodation for at least your first and final year, if not longer. They'll also have a dining hall for catered provision and also for those sort of like classic Oxbridge experience formal dinners, which incidentally are actually incredibly cheap. They cost about £6.50 at Oriel for 3 courses. You will also have things like a library, you will have a common room, a bar, probably other sports facilities as well. However, you can research this according to your priorities. So, a particularly common priority is a student saying, I want to be able to live in my college for the duration of my course. Not every single college will do this, although an increasing number are able to offer that. So, you might want to kind of look at how much accommodation you can get, whether it's enough to cover your entire degree, or whether you would need to look somewhere else. Also, location can be a big priority for some students, purely because students are lazy, to be quite honest, and they like a short walk to their department for their lectures in the morning. So it is no surprise to us when the college directly opposite a faculty building gets a complete kind of oversubscription of fantastic applicants for that specific course. So that's one way of potentially narrowing down your options. Sometimes people pick colleges on the basis of how pretty they are or how good they've heard the food is. There will be all sorts of different reasons. We're not going to ask you at any kind of point in the application process why you've chosen a college as your first choice, if you have. So do feel free to make this decision according to your personal priorities. Also, just a heads up, about 20% of Oxbridge students actually attend a college that wasn't their first choice. This was my personal experience. I ended up going to a college which I'd never heard of before I actually went to my interview there, but it turned out to be a better choice for me than the one that I actually applied to in the first place. So, the system clearly knew what it was doing there for me. Truthfully, everybody ends up loving the college that they go to. Sometimes people skeptical when I tell them that, but genuinely, it's very, very unusual to meet somebody who doesn't love their college. You can also make an open application. So if you're thinking, you know what, if this stuff doesn't actually matter that much, because it really doesn't, your application's still being overseen by the faculty or the department for your course, and they can still move you around. That's what happens for these 1 in 5 students that doesn't go to their first choice. If you want to skip all of that out and get a computer algorithm to do the deciding for you, you can make what's called an open application. So you tick another box on your UCAS form and then you just get randomly assigned a college. This doesn't have any bearing on how likely you are or not to get in. What I will say is if you are interested in going to Cambridge and you are female, there are a couple of women's only colleges left at Cambridge. At Oxford, we are all co-ed now. We have been for about the last 12 or 13 years. But at Cambridge, there are 2 women's colleges left at undergraduate level. So if you are a woman applying to Cambridge and you feel very strongly either way about these all women's colleges, maybe don't make an open application. They are typically slightly less oversubscribed, and therefore you're quite likely to end up there if you are an open applicant. Now, some FAQs for colleges, although, like Nick already said at the beginning of the session, I am more than happy to take questions at the end. First of all, my absolute number one FAQ for colleges and college choice, does it affect my chances of getting in? No, 100 times no. It is not a good use of anybody's time to try and pick a college tactically, thinking, well, this one was really undersubscribed last year, maybe that will make me more likely to get in. It really doesn't work like that. The faculties will move people around if there's a lot of great candidates at one college and not so many great candidates at another. So for that reason, do not waste headspace on thinking that this is going to be a useful tactical decision. Are there colleges which are better than others for my course? Also, no. You're going to be taught the same course, which is again controlled by the department or faculty. Sometimes people do base college choice on if there's a tutor there that they are really interested in their work. But again, that's not going to make you more likely to get in. It just means that perhaps you're going to be extra pleased if you get into a college where you're going to be taught by somebody that you admire. Do colleges have reputations and are these accurate? So sometimes it is easy to get information on colleges from places like the student room. I always recommend people to use these sorts of social media and websites and forums with a degree of caution, just because sometimes it can be easy for a rumor to spread about a college having a reputation. You might hear people saying such and such college is the party college or something, although I think all colleges truthfully want to think of themselves as the party college, where actually that could refer to a cohort of students that will have been and gone by the time that you get there. Sometimes even the reputations can be 50 or 100 years out of date. I would say that in my genuine experience of all of the colleges that I have known, not not only at Oxford, but also at Cambridge, they all really do want to work hard to be friendly and welcoming. They will all look a little bit different and have slightly different ways of administrating themselves, but ultimately you're not going to be getting a massively different experience or become part of a particular group of people, regardless of which college that you go to. So you will find all sorts of different people at each of them, and they will all be friendly and welcoming. Will I be able to live in my college for my whole course? This is where that research needs to kick in. I'll save you the trouble of the Google search for Oriel. Yes, you can, either on our main college site or our satellite site 10 minutes down the road, which is a bit more like living in a kind of city flat with your friends. But this will very much depend on the college that you're looking at. This is very easy to find on college websites, so please do have a little bit of a search if you've maybe got a college shortlist. Can I change my college? This is actually something I always say to people. Yes, in theory you can, but don't bank on it. It's quite a complicated process. You need to have a very good reason for doing it. And like I said, the overwhelming majority of Oxford and Cambridge students don't feel the need to. They feel that actually they really do enjoy being part of their college, whether they apply to it or not. So yes, in theory this is possible, but it's not the kind of thing that happens routinely. Then finally, how do I choose a college? Hopefully I have gone some way to answering that. First of all, don't stress. Secondly, check that it offers your course. And then thirdly, make sure that you are researching according to your individual priorities, and nobody can tell you what those are apart from you. Now let's talk a little bit about course choice, because this is a really important thing. In fact, it's the most important decision that you make when you apply to university. Sometimes people are like, yep, course choice done. Now I'm going to spend, 6 months stewing about my college choice for Oxbridge, where actually the course choice is far and away the most important thing. Do make sure that you are checking and you have checked and double checked for any subject specific entry requirements for your course. Sometimes these might be a little bit different to other universities. Sometimes they might be exactly the same, but it is definitely worth checking them out. All of our courses at Oxford and Cambridge offer excellent breadth, depth, and future prospects. We have some of the actual very best graduate employment rates in the entire country, if not the entire world. They are also designed for students who want a challenge. So yes, our degree courses are tricky, they are hard, they are challenging, but we take great pride in the fact that we are able to challenge our students who may not have actually been that challenged by their education up to that point, that we can get them to learn a lot, we can get them to develop a lot of new skills, and they come out the other end as a fantastic academic, as a fantastic scholar of their subject. So yes, absolutely they are challenging, and we're quite proud of that. This is also a great way of deciding between Oxford and Cambridge if you are in that position. Some of the courses that we offer are only available at one university or the other, but many others will be available at both, and they might even have exactly the same names. Please don't be deceived, even if they have the same names, and this applies for any other university as well, it doesn't mean that they're going to be the same course. They will be taught in quite different ways in some cases. There might be different options, there might be different kind of ways that the courses are set up. So actually, if you are trying to decide between Oxford and Cambridge, looking very closely at the course content is going to be a really good way of helping you to make up your mind. Now, I'm sure that many of the young people at least who are watching this presentation this evening will already be vaguely familiar with the sorts of stuff that we've got available at Oxford and Cambridge, if not, already having decided which course that they're aiming for. But just as a reminder, or as an introduction for those of you who might not know all of these kinds of things, this is a representative sample of the stuff that we've got available at each of the universities. So like I said, even if we do have the same course in name, it will be subtly different, at least on the actual delivery side. We cannot possibly offer everything, so there are definitely some things that we don't offer. It doesn't mean that we think that those courses that we don't offer aren't worth offering, or that they're rubbish or won't get you a job, but the kinds of courses that we offer at Oxbridge are very much tailored towards the way that we teach in the tutorial or supervision system. They suit academic research, they suit kind of academic focus, and that's why we offer them. We let other universities be experts in the other stuff. If anybody does have any specific questions about the course that they're interested in, I am also more than happy to take those as well. Also, just a kind of heads up, this is the kind of stuff which isn't offered by Oxford and Cambridge. I couldn't possibly list everything because there are a lot of university courses available in this country. But if you kind of look at these in contrast to the things that we saw on the last slide, quite a lot of these are quite hands-on, maybe quite vocationally focused, maybe require very specific facilities, for instance, like dentistry. I think it's just a good demonstration of things which probably wouldn't work that well being taught in the system that we teach our subjects in. Which brings us neatly on to the way that we do teach our subjects at Oxbridge. So first of all of our students will still receive plenty of group teaching, just like they would at any other university. So they will still go to lectures, they will still go to seminars, they will still go along to spend time in the laboratories if they're scientists, all of that kind of stuff. It's just that we have an additional layer of teaching on top of that, which we call the tutorial system at Oxford, and Cambridge calls it the supervision system. Truthfully, I'm not sure who decided that they were going to call it a different one, a different name to the other university, probably Cambridge. But truthfully, I'm not sure why they're called different things. They are the exact same system. So you will have at least one tutorial or supervision per week, if not maybe a couple, maybe 2 or 3, and they will have a ratio of between 3 students to 1 tutor, or even 1 student to 1 tutor. Very common to have tutorials in pairs. So this is a very, very small group form of teaching. It's very unusual that universities offer it at quite the same frequency as Oxford and Cambridge. So yes, absolutely, tutorials do happen in other universities, or tutorials or supervisions, as I should say, to be fair to Cambridge. Basically, yes, you will absolutely get these in other places. It's just that you're not going to get them anywhere else at the same level and frequency that you do at Oxbridge. I think this probably has the biggest impact on the way that you actually study as a student with us. And I think it's probably one of the things that really turns people's heads and makes them say, you know what, I would really like to study at this university. So this offers you the opportunity to have highly individualized teaching. It's a great opportunity to ask questions. So what you do is you get set a piece of work, a problem sheet for STEM and an essay question for arts, humanities and social sciences, broadly speaking. You would access all of your group teaching, so the content of your lectures. You've got 100 different libraries to go and seek out your reading list in, and then you'd produce that piece of work and bring it along to your tutorial or supervision. When you are in that tutorial or supervision, I say that you just have a chat about it, and people often look at me funny and are like, is that it? But you will have a discussion about the piece of work that you've done that week. So you have got all sorts of opportunities to ask questions of the world leading experts who are teaching you. So if you don't understand something, they're probably going to be a good person to help you out. You've got lots of opportunities also to try out new ideas. I definitely remember writing some really kind of left field, interesting, wacky essays in my time at Oxford. Most of them didn't work out that well, but that was completely fine because you are, if anything, encouraged to make mistakes in your tutorials. You don't get graded for these. Your performance in your tutorial or supervision isn't going to go towards any kind of final grade. You're using them as a way to practice for the assessments that you do have. And actually, our students probably get more things wrong in them than they get things right. So actually, that's where they're doing the most of their learning. It's absolutely to be encouraged. This is a little bit different to how you are used to learning either at school or at college. And sometimes people are a little bit daunted by it. They think that sounds really, really intense, but you've got to kind of come to it with the mindset that the people who are teaching you in these tutorials are not there expecting you to know everything. They are there to help guide your learning, and they are ready to listen to you. And as such, actually, even if you aren't the kind of person who necessarily loves putting your hand up in class and having a good old discussion with, the rest of your peers, this could still be an amazing way for you to learn. And I think it's one of the most special things about Oxford and Cambridge. Now we're going to talk about student finance, and as you can see, rather unsubtly, I've put up on the screen one of the questions that I get asked the most, probably by parents and carers. So quite often, students are won over, but parents and carers are maybe a little bit nervous about the financial side of university. And I quite regularly get asked, is Oxbridge more expensive than other universities? And I am here to reassure you that although, yes, it does still represent a level of financial commitment for at least the student, if not the student plus their family to some extent, Oxbridge is not going to cost you more than other universities. So first of all, we have an identical student finance process to every other UK university. You apply in the same way, you get allocated funds in the same way, the tuition fees cost the same. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we get at Oxbridge is that we somehow cost more per year than other universities, and that is absolutely not the case, I am very pleased to say. I can understand why people do think that though. Actually, at Oxbridge, you also have a greater range of non-repayable financial support available. So Oxbridge for undergraduate level study typically don't offer scholarships, but they do offer means-tested bursaries. So they will look at the financial information on your student finance application, for instance, and they will award additional non-repayable financial support on top of that, plus in other kind of ways and circumstances. So you don't have to pay this back. It's designed to go on top of your student loan. And Oxford and Cambridge are actually the two most generous universities in the entire country for this form of financial support. Also, living in a college does actually come with quite a lot of perks, including the fact that the majority of the facilities and things that you're accessing are subsidised by the college. So, for instance, eating in the dining hall is going to be very cheap compared to eating, in a cafe or buying convenience food. Like I said earlier, a three-course sit-down formal dinner at Oriel will cost you about £6.50, and then all of the informal meals, so breakfast, lunch, and informal dinner, which is every night, you can get for less than that. So that's also a really kind of good thing. You can also, of course, cook for yourself, although I say this as somebody who fully took advantage of the dining hall, shall we say, at university. My poor mother, she was like, "You'll never learn to cook." And I was like, "But so what? I'm having lovely food." Also, cheap and free social events. I know that this isn't necessarily the kind of top of certainly parents and carers' priority lists, but at the same time, you do have lots of opportunities to go for nights out, join sports teams, participate in performing arts for either a very small cost or actually completely for free, because the colleges will have particular pots of money dedicated to that. Also, the fact that you're guaranteed college accommodation for a minimum of 2 years, if not longer, and typically you'll only be paying rent for the short university terms that you are there. It's very common, very standard practice for our students to move out during the holidays. We have very long holidays at Oxbridge, and then you only get charged for the actual time that you are occupying the room. So, for the sake of a little bit of hassle moving your stuff into storage at the end of term, at the same time, that does also mean that you have the opportunity to save a bit of money there as well. We also have a fantastic library and book grant system at both universities. It's actually very unusual for our students to have to drop hundreds of pounds on things like textbooks, because college libraries will keep an eye on the subjects' needs for the subjects which are offered in the college, and they will make sure that that sort of provision is available for our students. If students, for whatever reason, are absolutely desperate to have their own copy of something and they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, we do also have a level of book grant systems as well, if that ability to annotate and highlight is really important to you. Travel grants are also available. Admittedly, this is for something which is kind of a little bit extra on top of the rest of the living costs. But if you did want to go and visit somewhere to do with your degree, for instance, you were a historian and you wanted to visit a particular historical site, our colleges are generous enough to have travel grants, so you can apply for that. Well, at least before COVID, I won't say that we're always giving these out because nobody's traveling anywhere at the moment. But at one stage we were sending like all the physicists to CERN over the summer, that kind of stuff. Hardship funds, this one's really important. So there are pots of money that colleges can access if financial circumstances change while a student is already studying with us. It's really important to say that Oxbridge does not want money to be the thing that puts you off, because there are ways that they can help with that. Also, and this is something which I wouldn't recommend kind of relying on to pay the bills, but at the same time, colleges are even generous enough to offer small financial rewards for academic success. So, for instance, if you get like a first in all of your first year exams, your college might award you with like a couple of £100, which actually that kind of thing can be a real boost for our students. So I think what I'm trying to say here is, yes, absolutely, university does represent a financial commitment. And I remember my parents being quite stressed about that entire side of things, not just them affording to be able to support me, but also the fact that I'd be starting my adult life in debt. And that was something that, they hadn't had in their past and weren't particularly enthusiastic being in my future. At the same time, Oxbridge is not going to cost you more as a parent or carer to support your child to go to. In some cases, actually, the support that's available from either your Oxford or Cambridge college will be more than what other universities could offer. So lots of reasons for somebody to say, you know what, Oxbridge isn't for me, but money should never be the thing that puts you off. Just gonna briefly put this up on the screen. Oh, whoops. I'm also just gonna have a quick sip of water. Excuse me. So costs that there are to consider include things like rent. So this will be for all first years and also, for the majority for college accommodation. Sometimes people do choose to live out and live in a privately rented flat or house. Sometimes, even over having the option of their college accommodation, but that's very much down to individual circumstances. Food will sometimes be included to some extent in the college rent payment. So sometimes there will be, like you'll have your rent for the term, and included in that bill will also be a certain kind of level of food tab that you can then spend in the dining hall. Travel is not likely to be a massive cost to consider at Oxford and Cambridge because these are very small cities. If you do like to kind of get around quickly and you are quite into cycling, then we are big cycling cities. We only have, in Oxford, we only have one hill, and at Cambridge, they have none at all. In the entire county, there's literally none, or maybe one, but it's not very big. So it's very, very easy to bike around. And also, just because of the size of the cities, and also because, frankly, of the terrible, terrible one-way systems that we have, you very rarely see students hopping on the bus like you might do, say, in London or in another bigger city. So actually, unless your child is going to be, getting a bike, and then definitely get a good lock for it, is my advice. You're unlikely to need to spend that much on travel. Course expenses will also be typically supported to at least some extent by the college. It might be that they say you need this particular type of calculator. We recommend that you buy maybe these books yourself, but then we're able to give you the other ones, that kind of thing. So that's not going to be a huge cost in most cases. And then social and extracurricular activities, that will very much be down to the individual. There are lots and lots of things to get involved with at both of the universities, but at the same time, actually, like, this is very much kind of something that you can access. None of our societies are prohibitively expensive, and most of them will also offer sort of bursaries of their own if people aren't able to afford their fees for that. Now let's turn our attention to the application process a little bit. So if we have a look here, we've got the standard offers for both universities and the different subjects. So for those of you who might not have had a look at like a full university prospectus, there is typically a slightly higher offer level for the STEM subjects. This is because typically this is where a higher number of A stars are actually awarded at A level. So in things like maths, for instance, you're more likely to get an A star on one of those than you are in, say, English. That's not saying that they're easy, it's just a reflection of the way that they're marked. So those will be slightly higher than arts and humanities subjects. Also, Cambridge offers on a slightly higher level than Oxford does. This often, gets people scratching their heads. They're like, why? We are looking for very similar types of students after all. This is because Cambridge have done quite a lot of research into the connection between people getting A stars at A level or multiple A stars at A level and them doing really well in the exam system that they have there. We've done similar research at Oxford and we haven't quite found the same link, so we offer on a slightly lower level than Cambridge. So at Cambridge for STEM, you are looking at basically an offer of A star, A star, A star, A for any of the STEM subjects, with the exception of veterinary medicine and PBS, which is psychological and behavioural sciences. So that's an A star and 2 A's. And at Oxford, you are looking at maybe kind of half and half, just about, depending on the science that you want to do. Some will offer it 2 A stars and an A, typically the more mathematical end of STEM, and the rest will offer an A star and 2 A's. For the arts and humanities subjects, Cambridge will offer A star AA for all of these. Economics is in there because sometimes people like to bundle it up as a social science. Actually, at Cambridge, it's a very mathematical subject, so that's an A star A offer. And then finally, for Oxford, if you're applying for any of our arts, humanities, or social sciences courses, it's a 3A offer, which certainly my experience quite a long time ago now, but my experience was that actually my offer for Oxford was one of my lowest on my UCAS form. Other universities wanted me to get A stars, where Oxford didn't. Now let's talk about the full application process. So I've got another half of this kind of flow chart, but let's talk through the first bit now because this is what your young people are currently working towards. So right now, you should be in the sort of bracket of choosing your course slash choosing your college or whether to make an open application. You might have already ticked both of these things off now, but it's totally okay to be a little bit unsure and still weighing up your options. Just keep in mind all of that advice that I've already given about choosing both of these things. Also, an important thing to make yourself aware of, make sure that you've checked the assessment or test registration deadlines if your course requires you to sit an admissions test or assessment. This is something I'm going to go into more detail in about shortly, but this is a really important part of the process. Then you've got your UCAS form. This is rather unfairly relegated to one of these arrow-shaped boxes on my PowerPoint slide. But of course, we know that the UCAS application is quite a big step in this process. It will include the personal statement, it will include your academic record up to this point, and it will also include a reference from college. That will need to be submitted by the UCAS deadline of the 15th of October. And I know that that is very widely publicised, not only by UCAS themselves and by the universities, but also by King Ed's. So please do not fear, you will not be able to miss that deadline unless you really try very hard to. But that's why this group's called, kind of early entry, because we have the early UCAS deadline. So that goes in by the 15th of October. Cambridge does actually have an additional supplementary questionnaire. It used to be called the SAQ, but they're fiddling around with it this year and they're not sure what it's going to be called now. So they've asked me to change this to just supplementary questionnaire, which is due in a week later. Gives you opportunities to tell them a little bit more about any mitigating circumstances, that kind of thing. You'll then have a deadline sometime in the autumn, and again, you will need to make sure that you've checked this, although most of them will be fairly similar. You might need to submit written work if you're applying for an essay-based subject. You also might need to take an admissions test. Certainly will for about 85% of our courses at Oxford. The majority of admissions tests this autumn will be sat on the 3rd of November, which is a Wednesday, and written work deadlines will also be kind of between that and the 15th of October. Then the universities will take all of the information that they've been able to glean from all of these different pieces of information. So, your test script, your written work, if you've submitted some, your personal statement, your reference, all of that kind of good stuff. And then we can use that to make a shortlist. That shortlist then informs who we are going to invite for interview, which will happen in December. So this year we had a bit of a break from the norm of having people in person at Oxford and Cambridge. Sometimes we'd have people for, kind of 3 or 4 days at Oxford. I like to call it the mini break approach. Sadly, that wasn't possible last year because of COVID. And this year it's also been announced fairly recently that we will be having another online only admissions cycle this year. So it will be via the magic of Teams. You don't get, the kind of all expenses paid trip to Oxford. But at the same time, you still will be having some really interesting discussions. You'll be able to see how you might suit the tutorial system, all of that kind of stuff. And then after that, after all of the interviews are done and dusted, we then have as much information as we can possibly get on our shortlisted candidates, and we make our decisions kind of from late December through to early January, and then let everybody know whether they've been made an offer or not by sometime in early January. So actually it's very possible for you to have got, your UCAS application done and dusted by the 15th of October and have completed this entire process for Oxford and Cambridge before the regular UCAS deadline has even been and gone. So although I know that sometimes the young people that I work with are kind of like, oh my gosh, this is such a lot to think about over the summer, I need to get it done really early. It is absolutely worth it, especially as your other university choices will start dishing out those offers as soon as the applications start rolling in. So you're in a really good position there, whether the outcome is what you want it to be or not. Now, this diagram here just demonstrates a little bit of what we are actually looking for in a student. You are very welcome, and I would actually very much recommend that you have a look at the selection criteria for the universities that you or your child are applying for, because they can be quite enlightening. But this is the sort of condensed version of what we are looking for at Oxford, and Cambridge have very similar selection criteria as well. So first of all, commitment to study. I've mentioned the fact that our courses are quite challenging. They are going to push our students. And as such, we do want students who are committed to the subject that they want to study. It's why that course choice element is so important. Academic ability will also be a big thing for us because our courses are so rigorous. So it's not just a case of you being keen, it's a case of you also being able to keep up intellectually. That incidentally doesn't mean that we are expecting you to be perfect, because we're also looking for academic potential. That's actually why we do stuff like the admissions test, because they test aptitude in ways that your GCSEs and A levels and any other kind of work that you've done at school or college isn't necessarily going to be testing. Independent thought's also going to be important to us. It's an important thing for any university student, I think, but it's certainly going to be essential to students who are, producing those pieces of work independently to go to their tutorials and supervisions. So this is also going to be something which is tested for the most part in the interview part of the admissions process. So when we give you new pieces of information to consider, we also test it to some extent in the admissions tests. Then finally, enthusiasm for your subject. If you look at our websites, we specifically talk about informed enthusiasm, because anybody can be enthusiastic and not know a whole lot about something. But we really do want the kind of student who is willing to go out there and go above and beyond what they're already studying in the classroom and say, this is why I like this subject. I found it really interesting that it linked to this. This really sparked my interest in this other subject area. And if you put those together, all of those 5 things, you are going to get the kind of person who would potentially make a fantastic Oxbridge student. Now, when I was talking about, that idea of being willing to go above and beyond what you or your child is already doing in the classroom, I'm referring to something called supercurricular activities. And this is, again, something that I know that King Ed's is very, very on the ball with, and they have lots of stuff available, as well as lots of very helpful members of staff to point out different recommendations and guide students in choosing stuff. I think I may already be spoilering one of my next slides when I say, one of my FAQs is how important are my extracurriculars? So extracurriculars are the things that go along this, like on the side of your regular studies. So things like sport or D of E or part-time work. The truth is, actually, Oxbridge not that interested in that kind of stuff. It's not part of our selection criteria. Other universities might well consider it, but even so, they are equally going to be incredibly impressed by this sort of stuff. So doing your supercurricular activities well doesn't mean doing everything on this slide, for one thing. Most of it is, to some extent subject specific, so it's not going to apply to everybody. But it's being the kind of student who's willing to do just a little bit, here and there, keeping it ticking over and making sure that actually they are genuinely enjoying exploring their subject. You could definitely go through the motions to some extent, write a decent personal statement, but we are looking for genuine passion and motivation and commitment. I also always say to students that actually, if you do really, really love the subject that you're applying to do, doing at least a little bit of supercurricular exploration shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be the kind of thing that you think, oh man, I can't think of anything worse than doing this. So please do make sure that you are enthusiastic about the sort of stuff that you're exploring. It's a great way of just double checking that you're applying for the right thing. Now, just a few things to keep in mind. First of all, and I remember being in this position, having this chat with my guidance tutor at my sixth form college when I was 17. Getting into Oxbridge, or even just being in the position to apply, so even just kind of being invited along this evening, that sort of thing, is an amazing achievement. But it isn't a disaster if it doesn't work out. More people don't get into Oxbridge than do get in. That's not a reason not to apply, because we can only choose from the people who actually went and put their application in. At the same time, there are lots of other fantastic universities out there, and people who are of the kind of caliber of student to be applying to Oxford or Cambridge, they're very likely to get into at least a couple of those other fantastic universities. So it is not the end of the world if this doesn't make out. At the same time, the only way of you knowing whether or not you would have got a place is being brave enough to apply. And actually, if you were to have a chat, admittedly, it would need to be a virtual chat in this day and age, with any of our students, the majority of them will always say things like, well, I wasn't really sure, but I wanted to know. I wanted to know whether I could do it or not, and here I am. So you can only know if you do actually put yourself out there, and also we can only know about you and have the possibility of letting you in if you've applied to us. So the universities are interested in finding the best students possible from each pool of applicants. Of course, you will have put yourselves in those pools, I'm sure. And we know that these students could come from any background. We are not looking for a particular type of student who looks a particular way or talks a particular way or has a particular set of cultural or life experiences. These universities get more and more diverse, more and more open to students from backgrounds just like the young people who are here this evening every single year. Partly this is because the university works really hard on making sure that those students know about us and feel supported and encouraged to apply. But also I think it is a little bit of a case of those students realizing that they might just have it in them to, buck the trend and think, well, yeah, actually you don't need to be from a posh school or from, a family where everybody's gone to university, because that's not what makes the best students possible. Students who are admitted to either Oxford or Cambridge will be supported throughout their time at either of the universities and will also have plenty of opportunities to make the experience unique to them. There are more than 800 different clubs and societies at each of the universities, things like you've never even heard of before. I am always learning. Every single year there's a student who's a member of something totally wacky that I've never heard about, and I'm like, can you please tell me what that is, because I am intrigued. You do get lots of opportunities to find your tribe at any university, but also at Oxford or Cambridge. I think one of the things that worried my parents the most was not just the fact that they were terrified that I was going to be really disappointed if I didn't get in, but they were also worried that I'd get there and I'd find that there wouldn't be anybody who I had anything in common with. Actually, what I did realize when I did get in was that I had something in common with every single person that I met, and it was the fact that we'd worked really hard to get there, and also the fact that we were really, really enthusiastic about the stuff that we were studying. Yes, there were quite a lot of differences in some cases other than that, but at the same time, I really do remember that sense of camaraderie and that sense of, sort of belonging from very, very early on in my university experience. Finally, there is absolutely no need for this process to be lonely or confusing for anybody, including parents and carers, and indeed teachers as well. We are here to help. I always say to people, whether they are students, whether they are their parents, whether they are supporting teachers, there's no reason to have to go into this process without having questions answered if you've got them. That's why people like me exist. That's why we have people like me employed by the university. That's why we have open events and stuff like that. So please do make sure that any questions that you have get answered before that application process starts, either this evening, or you're welcome to email me anytime. That brings us very neatly to the end of this presentation. Like I said, I am very, very happy to take any questions at all, and shortly I will stop sharing my screen and stop being a kind of disembodied voice behind the PowerPoint. Some useful website addresses on the right-hand side of the screen. My college's website is for Oriel College is www.oriel.ox.ac.uk, but every single college will have them, and this is a really great place to go for information on stuff like accommodation types and costs, food, that kind of living side of being a student at Oxford. The Oxford University website is ox.ac.uk. This is also where you'll be able to access our virtual open day provision on the 30th of June and the 1st of July. So that's next Wednesday and Thursday. There will be lots of question asking opportunities there. We know it's not quite the same as the real thing, but at the same time, there's lots of very useful information being put out there. And then also a couple of social media profiles as well. Then finally, my email address is outreach@oriel.ox.ac.uk. Like I say, you are welcome anytime to get in touch via email. I would be more than happy to put your mind to rest, point you in the right direction, any of that kind of stuff. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing here, but my email address is fairly widely held at King Ed, so if you haven't had a chance to take it down, they will be able to help you out. And I'll have a look in the chat and see if there's anything in there.
Thank you so much, India. A really interesting and helpful breakdown of the nature of the application and what the students are getting into. So anyone that has any questions, please, if you can use the chat function, it's probably easier than everyone trying to speak at the same time. So just type them in there.
I've never quite worked out how to sort of work that awkward silence where you're waiting for people to type things into the chat box.
Yeah, I mean, it's effectively done by saying that though, so excellent work.
Yeah, I guess so. What can I say?
Now we have a student studying history coming to Oriel
Oh, fantastic.
this year. So one for you to look out for. Ben Nolan will be joining you to study history.
I will definitely keep an eye out for that name. That's great news.
And Ben was the only student who was brave enough this this cycle to volunteer to be interviewed in front of the entire body of people who were applying. So it's
Oh gosh, really?
a big
Gosh.
signal of what you can really get if you stick yourself out there and get some
Fantastic.
good practice. Here we go. So the questions are starting to come in.
Okay, fab. So a question from Beth. Thank you very much, Beth, for being our first question. Are the entry requirements pretty much set in stone? I'm sure you are hoping for me to say no, but I'm afraid yes, they are. Oxbridge's entry requirements are there for a kind of very firm reason. We think that, you know, the kinds of students who um, achieve those entry requirements at A level are typically the ones who go on to do the best in the course. So yes, I'm afraid so. We don't tend to kind of drop them as other universities might do. So sorry, but at the same time, you do at least know what you're working with there. How much does Oxbridge value EPQs from Alistair? So EPQs very highly valued, not only by Oxbridge, but also by other top universities as well. Some other universities I have heard of in the past, I can't guarantee that this is still a thing, but I have heard of other universities actually dropping offers by a grade if somebody has a great EPQ, which is quite a good benefit. Also at Oxbridge, they are absolutely the perfect supercurricular activity because it is a high level piece of work. It demonstrates your interest and your passion for your subject. And also, you know, you get to do it in something that is interesting to you. Definitely don't do an EPQ if you're not interested in the topic. That will make it unpleasant and boring. So I actually did an EPQ when I was at my sixth form college. I had a great time doing it. The topic of it actually turned into my undergrad dissertation. And I was asked about it in every single one of my Oxford interviews. And because I was interviewed by a couple of different colleges, I had quite a few of them. So I think that kind of says all you need to know, really. So definitely don't pass up the opportunity to do an EPQ. It's very valuable.
Yeah, we've also found that students who are having a bit of creative difficulty with the personal statement, who are doing an EPQ, find it really, really helpful to start framing their thoughts around the thing that they're choosing to do the EPQ on. So
That's
it's
fantastic
like
advice.
a helpful break of any creative block that you might be having.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that completely, Nick. How does a double honours work with the workload? Okay, Lauren, you have tapped into my specialist subject here. So I did classics and English at Oxford. I would say that a joint honours at Oxford typically isn't quite half and half. It is usually like a little bit more than half and a little bit more than half. At the same time, we only offer joint honours courses in subjects that we think go really well together. So for instance, classics and English, there's a very nice link there in terms of, you know, the sort of the ways that the literature interacts over time, that kind of stuff. It works the same for stuff like history and English, modern languages and history, like the combinations that we offer. So I think it can often feel like you're not necessarily doing that extra level of work. You do also have certain kind of options knocked out by doing a joint honours. So like you don't have access to the full number of options available at each faculty, and you will have your options slightly limited on each side because of course you've got another subject to manage. I think, yes, it is definitely going to be hard work, but at the same time, the single honours course isn't exactly going to be easy either at Oxford. So I would definitely recommend going for it if you are really interested in the way that two subjects are linked together. I'd be interesting to know which joint honours you're looking at, but at the same time, I'm not going to put you on the spot in the chat there, but I'm just interested. So just let me scroll up a bit. We've got a nice long one here from Victoria. So you mentioned picking between Cambridge and Oxford. Personally, I'm rather torn between chemical engineering at Cambridge and chemistry at Oxford. Fair enough, both very interesting courses. I want to go into sustainability, more specifically either sustainable materials or more sustainable energy generation. Which course would be better for entering that field of research? Great question. Truthfully, I don't think you'd be at a disadvantage entering either of those fields from either of those courses. You could also, and you probably are thinking, why on earth are you throwing more options at me? Maybe also look at materials science at Oxford. That would also offer you similar links to that particular industry. But I genuinely don't think that you're going to find that you're disadvantaged in that career aspiration, whichever one that you go to. So sorry for not helping make up your mind any more than that. Just go for the course that you think you're going to enjoy the most, honestly. Or if you think I'm going to enjoy them both equally, go for the university that you think you're going to like living at more. And I won't be offended if it's Cambridge. So I hope that that helps you out, Lauren. From Katerina, are subjects like English more exam-based or more coursework-based? Maths and physics, if you're interested. Thank you very much, Lauren. That's a slightly different one to the sort of Arts and Humanities joint honours, sorry Katharina, I'll get back to your question very briefly. The science ones are typically a little bit more methodically half and half. So if that kind of answers your question a bit more there. And of course, yes, I am definitely interested. So Katharina's question, are subjects like English more exam-based or more coursework-based? Truthfully, most of our courses at Oxford and indeed at Cambridge are going to be fairly heavy on the exams. That's not to say that there aren't coursework options and different coursework bits and pieces across the arts and humanities, but we don't have like a full coursework load for either of those subjects. So for instance, in English, you've used English as an example, so I'm going to semi-assume that that's the one that you're interested in. Basically, in English, you've got the majority of exams based around the period papers. So those are for, specific periods of literature. You go from Anglo-Saxon right up to the present day over the course of your time with us. You also would submit a dissertation. Most university courses will require you to do that. You'll do an extended essay on a special topic that you have chosen. That can be anything from the history of the book and dictionaries to children's literature to film to, there's literally like 200. I won't keep going on about that. And then basically you've also got a Shakespeare portfolio where you write 3 short essays. So that's your kind of coursework bit, but you're also then doing, I think it's 4 exams for your finals. So Oxford and Cambridge do still quite like their old-fashioned exam style assessments, if that answers your question overall. More questions, fantastic. So from, oh, sorry, just I was reading it and then it just went bloop and pulled it down. Does Oxbridge look for applicants that have a good sense of what they want to do after uni? Only if they are applying for medicine. Otherwise, truthfully, we are under no illusions that most people don't really have it that worked out. And even if they do have it worked out, it's very possible that they'll change their mind multiple times when they're at uni. We have a fantastic careers service at both of the universities. You can access their resources for life. So if I had a bit of a career crisis and I wanted to do something completely different, I could go and get access to the careers service at Oxford. But don't feel that you have to write loads and loads on your personal statement justifying your course choice by saying like, I want to do this, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a business person, a banker, a consultant. You don't have to have that stuff worked out. We want to admit students who are going to enjoy their course. That's our main sort of purpose. A question here from Emma, does having a unique EPQ, for example, something that isn't often explored within your subject, make it more highly regarded at interview or in the personal statement? Or is a well done, more common research area equally okay? I will say, Emma, first of all, that everybody's EPQ is by definition unique, even if you feel that lots and lots and lots of people have already written about it. I think it is totally up to you. I don't overthink it too much. Go with what you find the most interesting. We are pleased with any sort of interesting perspective that you can bring to the table from having done an EPQ. So, don't be afraid of thinking, well, there's already lots of work on this. That's completely fine. One here from Charlie. How does the submission of an in-college written text affect admissions for humanities? So basically, if we do want your written work, we want something that was just written like normally as part of a class or as a homework task. We're not particularly concerned about, it having mistakes or your teacher having corrected it. You can definitely have a look. There's some very specific guidelines on the university website about like what we want in our selected written work. I wouldn't say that it makes or breaks anybody's application, because none of our pieces of information that we get about you during the admissions process, it's not like a single one of those is going to be like, oh, okay, this person's definitely a no. So I think it's just, think of it as it building up the picture, basically. It's not going to be something which kind of is disastrous for your application. Just make sure that it shows you at your best possible light, and all will be well, I am sure. A question here from Isabel. What do you think would make a personal statement or interview stand out as being the right person for Oxbridge? Sorry in advance, Isabel, for a very boring answer, but the kind of person who stands out is going to be the person who hits our selection criteria the best and the hardest. So your way of making your personal statement stand out will be to really interact intelligently with your supercurriculars. Make sure that you are making links, make sure that you are also paying attention to the little things, like making sure that your sentence structure hangs together well so it's easy to read. We aren't necessarily looking for people to stand out as well. I think it's a bit of a kind of misconception that you have to absolutely make yourself memorable to your interviewers. I think that it's more of a case of, yes, hitting the selection criteria well, but also, remembering that every single piece of information that you submit as part of an application will be considered and considered again, and then considered in conjunction with other things throughout the process. So you don't have the pressure on you to be absolutely stand out in any particular area. You've just got to do your best in each part of the process.
If I can just dive in here just to reassure students and parents and carers who are here.
Of course.
Isabel, so everyone's personal statement will be read and will go through multiple edits by either me or Sue, so that we make sure that it's focused and it's tight, and the language works, and the super and the extracurriculars are there. And if you do get an interview, then we will make sure that you get a mock interview conducted with a subject expert in college. So you'll go into the interview process having had the bad time in preparation for the good time, which is when you know what you're up for.
I will also say, like, King Eds definitely know what they're doing with this stuff. They have got a lot of practice in taking people through this process and supporting them. I definitely kind of see a lot of stuff which, frankly, my own sixth form college could have done more like the way they do it at King Eds. So please do not kind of feel that you're going to be on your own with any of this stuff. A question. Oh, sorry, Sue. No, carry on.
We didn't actually bribe you for that comment, but thanks.
No, that's completely off my own back. I mean, like, I don't take bribes typically, but I do quite like chocolate. A question here from Ian: how much do your GCSE grades matter? They are part of the picture, but they again will not make or break an application. We like to see a handful of good grades, the kind of top grades, so 7s and above. At the same time, we're also very much aware that GCSEs last year were not necessarily as reflective and as accurate, a reflection of students' abilities as they perhaps were in previous years. So we are taking them with a little bit more of a pinch of salt this year, as will all universities. At the same time, like, we will look at them definitely, and certainly for courses which are very oversubscribed, like medicine, they can factor into the decisions where it comes to shortlisting, just because we've got so many people to try and get through. From Jivan here: to what extent does each year count towards the final degree? Is this the same at Oxford and Cambridge? I'm afraid it's not even the same between the courses that we've got, unfortunately. So this will depend vastly on the course that you want to do. Sometimes you will have, basically everybody will have their kind of first year pretty much where it doesn't count towards your final grade. You've just got to pass the exams. It's then just that after that, some courses you won't have exams again until your final year, and then they'll all count, and you'll also have coursework. Some courses, particularly in the STEM subjects, certainly at Oxford, you will have then smaller numbers of exams which count towards your final grade each subsequent year. But please do make sure that you have a look on the university's websites, because they make the kind of structure of each course very clear, and then you know what you can expect. Okay, here we are. So from Victoria again, thank you for all of your questions, Victoria. You mentioned that admissions tests are the way for the college to determine a student's aptitude for the subject. If the subject doesn't have an admissions test, then will the interview be more difficult? I wouldn't say it would be more difficult, but I also wouldn't say that any of our interviews would be easy. It's more just a case of, I think, to be quite honest, we're probably moving towards a system where every subject has an admissions test. It's just some have brought them in at various stages because they found them useful. So for instance, geography are in the process of bringing one in, and it was put back because of COVID. Now they're kind of hanging around with it a little bit. I do think that within 10 years, we'll probably be seeing all of the courses at Oxbridge having admissions tests, just because it's useful for us to have that info on you. But no, I wouldn't say that it affects the experience of the interview for those subjects that don't have them. From Thomas: for a subject such as materials science, how much would the admissions tests affect the final offer, for example? Will they have more impact than the interview or grades, etc.? Great question, Thomas, but I'm going to use this as a kind of vehicle to basically say no part of the selection process is more important than another. It's actually really I think it puts a lot of undue stress onto candidates if they are thinking, well, this is worth X% and this is worth Y% and this is more important than this. We do try to take the process as holistically as possible. We really try to weigh up the different factors that we have at play, and we really do try to see the entire student as a full picture where we possibly can. So for that reason, I would kind of I'd be encouraging you to steer away from thinking of like it in those kinds of terms, if that makes sense. So it's not a case of something that you can really quantify. So sorry for not being able to give a mathematical answer to that question. And then a question here from Sarah: how might applying for deferred entry affect a candidate's chance of being offered a place? Is there a difference between Oxford and Cambridge in this regard? Not especially. I will say that for both universities, we do sort of require you to know that you want to defer before you defer, if that makes sense. I think most other universities, you can quite merrily phone up the university, you know, in sort of August and say, oh, by the way, I'm going on a gap year. I would quite like to defer my place. And they'll be like, okay, great, see you next year. For Oxford and Cambridge, because we have slightly tighter margins on the places that we have available, it does mean that basically if you want to apply for a deferred place, if you know that you want to go on that gap year, you will need to make that clear when you do apply. It's not guaranteed that you'll be able to defer your place after your offer's been made, unless you have like kind of medical circumstances and stuff like that. I will say that it doesn't necessarily affect your chance of being made an offer that much. It's just something to be aware of, that it does mean that a college will have to kind of put aside a place for the next year for you if you're applying deferred. And sometimes tutors are a bit like, well, you know, we just need to look at them extra carefully. But at the same time, we do still have successful deferred candidates every single year. And I would also say that they have the benefit of being able to apply with their A-level grades, and, you know, not have the stress of results day like everybody else does. So swings and roundabouts, I think, a little bit with this one. But the key message is to make sure that if you do want to do a gap year, that you know before you apply and you make that very clear on your application. So I hope that answers your question.
India, just to riff off the deferred entry thing,
Of course.
I mean, I have lots of questions from students asking about whether or not it's going to be more competitive this year as a result of deferred applications through to the September start. Can you speak to that? I mean, I try and tell students that even if they knew that it was more competitive, it doesn't make a difference in what they're doing. But can you maybe give us some clarity on that?
Yeah, so I've been asked this question a lot, and I was also asked it quite a lot the last cycle as well. And there were, oh my goodness me, there were some big myths being circulated. Let me tell you, like some horrible things were being said that were not true. I would say that yes, there might be more deferred applicants this year. There were a little bit more. Yeah, there was a little bit more of that kind of thing last year. I wouldn't say that it affected the process in terms of in any kind of way that people at your guys' end would have noticed, if that makes sense. So yes, there were a few cases where we had slightly fewer places to play with in one college for one subject, but that just meant that there were maybe more people moved to a different college from that college, if that makes sense. So I always say to people as well, you know, Oxbridge is never easy to get into. You know, you're looking at about a kind of 20% acceptance rate for any of for an average across all of the courses. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if the course is right for you and if you are feeling enthusiastic about the teaching methods and the college system and all of that kind of stuff, you shouldn't be put off by that kind of thing anyway. So don't try to second guess yourself by thinking, oh, well, it might be extra competitive this year. It may well be that, you know, we see this trend of slightly more people applying for deferred entry continue year after year. And then actually, if it keeps happening, it's likely that, you know, it's not going to be such a thing anymore. It's just going to be routine. So please don't be put off by that kind of thing, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, there will probably be slightly more competition in certain places, but the way the system works probably means that will be fairly evened out by the faculties and departments. So I hope that reassures, and I also hope that gives the kind of clarity that you're looking for as well, Nick.
Yeah, thank you very much, mate. I know it's a really complicated thing, isn't it? And
it is.
Students look really want mathematical certainty in how difficult this is, and
I get that.
Yeah, and it's
totally
from our perspective, it's like it's not really a useful thing to know, even if you could know it, because it's still going to be a difficult process. Guys, if you have any more questions, So India, can we deal with the 3 that are there? But if we
Yeah,
suggest
of
that if you
course.
have any more questions, we can pass them on to India via email, because she's been going for an hour and 10 minutes at some pace here. So
Yeah. So question here, do all admissions tests require you to teach yourself the year 13 work for the subject, like the physics aptitude test for Oxford? Not all. Some require no prior knowledge at all. Some do require knowledge of an A-level syllabus, so that will be stuff like the PAT and MAT test. Some will require the skills that you need for a particular subject or course. So for instance, like the English and history tests will require you to have the skills that you would use in writing essays and working with unseen text, but they don't require you to know about a syllabus. It will very much depend on the test and how it's used within the admissions process. So I hope that that answers your question, Victoria. If you're going to defer your place in a STEM subject, would Oxbridge prefer that you took up a placement in a science or math sector during your gap year? I mean, this would certainly give you something interesting to talk about in your personal statement. It's not going to be expected. Unless you are applying for something which is very mathematical. So the maths faculty do tend to get a little bit twitchy about gap years, just because they want you to be able to demonstrate that you've kept your sort of maths ability alive, you know, kind of kept it fresh, kept it going in your brain. This isn't necessarily a kind of need across the board, though. It very much depends on the subject that you're applying for. Also, if this is something that you want to do on your gap year, like absolutely go for it. Like I said, it'll be really interesting to write about in your personal statement. So if that answers your question, Thomas. And then finally, how strictly do you look into home status for fees? Really, that's as strictly as student finance would look into it, essentially, as strictly as any other university would. So it is something which, you know, we will kind of take the information from student finance and all of that kind of stuff, and we will make decisions based on that. But if you do have queries specifically about stuff like fees status, I know that this can be quite a complicated area to consider. So I would definitely recommend getting in touch directly with the fees and funding team at the Central University for either Oxford or Cambridge, but I know for us it's called fees and funding. So if you have a look on the university websites and go directly for the contact there for any questions to do with that, I would highly recommend going there rather than via me, just because I would be probably referring to fees and funding anyway, and they are super duper helpful as well. So I hope that at least gives you some sort of answer to your question, Zachary. But thank you very much for asking it. Sorry.
wonderful. Thank you so much, India, and thank you very much everyone who's asked questions in the chat. This kind of thing is driven by the issues that you guys have, so thanks so much for expressing them. If you did have a question you didn't have a chance to ask it, then hopefully you got note of India's email address earlier on, or you say it's fairly easy to discover via the Oriel website in India. It's also on our website somewhere, I think.
I'm sure it is.
And a recording of this will go up on the King Ed's page over the next few days as well, so you'll be able to pick it up from there. Parents and carers, if there were questions that you wanted to ask but you didn't get round to, then please feel free to send either Sue or I an email, and we'll help answer any queries you have. Again, they're freely available on the website, or you can just ask the student to give it to you. So, oh, sorry, Sue, do you want to dive in here?
For a second and say, India, you mentioned the 15th of October as the deadline. So while we've got parents and carers with us, the internal deadline will be quite a lot earlier than that. We're looking to have the applications pretty well finished around the 15th of September, to give Nick and I time to process them and write the references and get them sent off by the 15th. So it is quite tight. Now is the time to be kind of honing them.
And they do that because they care.
Exactly, and there's like 160 off you, right? So do us a favour and get on top of it. Wonderful. So floods of thank yous coming in the chat. Give us a wavy reaction to say thank you as well. Any question any of you have at any point, just let us know and we'll sort you out. So thank you so much for coming.
Okay, thanks for having me, everybody.
Thank you again, India. It's so helpful, and it really does help put the students and parents and carers' minds at rest. So thanks for giving us 2 hours of your time on a Thursday evening.
That's okay. That's always a pleasure. I think, gosh, my laptop was not cooperating with me this evening, but it's all good.
no, it's they do have a sense, don't they, of when to
They
break.
do.